The Anarchy, the East India Company, Corporate Violence, and the Pillage of an Empire, by William Dalrymple. Introduction. There is a word in the English language that you and I use without a second thought. It's a short, sharp word that means to steal or plunder, especially during a time of war or chaos. The word is loot. But this word wasn't always part of our vocabulary. For centuries, it was a piece of slang, spoken only on the dusty plains of northern India. It was the Hindustani word for plunder. L-T. And then, in the late 18th century, something happened. This word suddenly crossed oceans and continents and embedded itself in the English language. To understand why, you only need to visit a place like Powys Castle, a craggy fortress in the Welsh countryside. Walk through its rooms, and you are not in Wales anymore. You are surrounded by the treasures of a fallen empire. Room after room is filled with imperial plunder, extracted from India. There are golden hookahs, jeweled daggers, rubies the color of pigeon's blood, and emeralds like chips of green ice. There are tiger heads set with sapphires, and even the campaign tent of a fearsome Indian sultan, Tipu, the Tiger of Mysore. This castle is awash with loot. And hanging in a quiet, shadowed corner is a large painting that tells the story of how it all got there. The painting shows an Indian prince on a throne, handing a scroll to a slightly overweight Englishman in a red coat. That Englishman is Robert Clive. The prince is the Mughal emperor, Shah Alam. And that scroll is the key to everything. It is a document that effectively hands over the financial control of India's richest provinces, Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, to a private company. Not a government, not a king or queen, a for-profit, shareholder-owned corporation, headquartered in one tiny office in London, 5 windows wide. This is the central, shocking story that historian William Dalrymple unravels in his masterpiece, The Anarchy. The book has been hailed as one of the most important historical works of our time, a stunning narrative that reads like a thriller. Dalrymple, who has spent much of his life living and writing in India, doesn't just give us a dry account of dates and treaties. He paints a vivid, breathing picture of a world in chaos, and tells the almost unbelievable story of how a single business operation, in less than 50 years, managed to conquer a subcontinent. We still talk about the British conquering India, but Dalrymple shows us that this phrase masks a much more sinister reality. It was a dangerously unregulated private company, led by a ruthless and brilliant corporate predator, that first seized vast chunks of India, existing for the sole purpose of enriching its investors. So, in the next few minutes, I want to take you on a journey. It's a journey back in time, to an age of emperors and merchants, of unimaginable wealth and devastating violence. By the time we are done, you will understand not just how a company conquered a country, but you will also see a timeless and chilling warning about the terrifying power of unchecked corporate greed. You will see how the world we live in today was shaped not just by nations and armies, but by the relentless, insatiable ambition of a single corporation. This is the story of the East India Company. This is the story of the Anarchy. Book summary. Our story begins not on a battlefield, but in a small, half-timbered hall in London, in the year 1599. While William Shakespeare was likely drafting Hamlet just across the river, a group of merchants, sea dogs, and adventurers gathered with a simple, audacious plan. They were tired of buying spices like pepper and cloves from middlemen, who marked up the prices. They wanted to sail to the East Indies and buy directly from the source. At the time, England was a relatively poor, backwater nation. Its early attempts at exploration had been mostly disastrous. Compared to the mighty Spanish and Portuguese, with their global empires, the English were amateurs. Their most famous sailors were little more than state-sanctioned pirates, like Sir Francis Drake, who made his name raiding Spanish treasure ships. The English had little experience in long-distance trade. But they were ambitious, and they had a revolutionary new idea: the joint stock company. It was a way for merchants to pool their resources and invite outside investors to fund ventures that no single person could afford. It was a corporation, a legal entity that could outlive its founders, with shares that could be bought and sold by anyone. And so, On the very last day of the year 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted a royal charter to a group of 218 men. They called themselves the Governor and Company of Merchants of London trading into the East Indies. We know it simply as the East India Company. At its founding, it was a tiny venture. Its initial capital was a fraction of its Dutch rival, the Volk. Its first voyage, commanded by Sir James Lancaster, was funded by just over £30,000. It was a perilous journey, but it returned a massive profit, mostly because Lancaster had done what English sailors did best. He'd captured a Portuguese ship and looted its cargo of pepper. For years, the company remained a modest player, struggling against the much wealthier and better organized Dutch. But after a brutal massacre of English traders by the Dutch in the Spice Islands, the company decided to change its focus. Instead of spices, they would trade in textiles, and the source for the world's finest textiles was India. When the company first arrived in India in the early 1600s, it entered a world of staggering wealth and power. This was the Mughal Empire, one of the richest and most powerful empires on earth. It ruled over a population of 150 million people and produced nearly a quarter of the world's manufactured goods. Its cities were megacities, teeming with merchants from all over Asia. The Mughal emperor, Jahangir, was fabulously wealthy, and his court was a place of unimaginable splendor. When King James I sent an official ambassador, Sir Thomas Roe, to the Mughal court in 1615, the English were treated as little more than curious supplicants. Roe, a courtier and diplomat, tried to talk about trade agreements, but the Emperor Jahangir was more interested in Roe's hunting dogs and the strange European paintings he'd brought as gifts. Jahangir was a keen collector of curiosities, and he viewed these Englishmen with the same mild interest he showed for the first Turkey to arrive in India. A famous Mughal painting from this period perfectly captures the power dynamic. It shows the Emperor Jahangir on his throne, a divine halo glowing behind him. He is turning to speak with a holy man, ignoring the other world leaders depicted at his feet. Tucked away in the bottom corner, almost out of frame, is a small portrait of King James I of England, looking sullen and insignificant. For the mighty Mughals, these scruffy traders from a foggy northern island were a very low priority. To trade successfully, the company realized it couldn't use force. It had to play by the Mughal rules, and for a century, it did just that. It slowly learned the customs of the court, the art of bribery, and the Persian language. It established small trading posts, or factories, in coastal cities like Surat, Madras, and, eventually, Calcutta. It behaved like a humble merchant, always seeking permission and showing respect to the Mughal authorities. This strategy paid off. The company's trade in Indian textiles boomed, and its profits grew steadily. Then, in 1707, everything changed. The great, formidable, and puritanical Emperor Aurangzeb died. Aurangzeb had been a brilliant general, but his intolerance and endless wars had stretched the empire to its breaking point. His death unleashed a storm of succession crises and civil wars. 3 of his successors were murdered. In one year, 1719, 4 different emperors sat on the throne. The once mighty Mughal Empire began to shatter. Regional governors, known as Nawabs, started to rule their provinces like independent kings. And a new, formidable power arose in the west, the Marathas. Originally peasant warriors, the Marathas were masters of lightning-fast cavalry raids. Led by their charismatic leader, Shivaji, they had been a thorn in Aurangzeb's side. Now, they swept across central India, carving out their own vast confederacy from the crumbling Mughal state. As one contemporary historian, Ghulam Hussain Khan, wrote, "The once peaceful realm of India became an abode of anarchy." It was in this chaos that the European trading companies saw their opportunity, and the first to truly understand the new rules of the game was not the English, but their great rival, the French. The French governor in India, a brilliant and ambitious man named Joseph-François Dupleix, realized that in this new, fractured India, a small but well-trained and disciplined army of Indian soldiers, drilled in the European style and led by European officers, could be a decisive force. These soldiers were called sepoys, from the Persian word sipahi. Duplex began to rent out his new sepoy army to rival Indian princes, acting as a kingmaker in their local disputes. In return, he received land, trading rights, and immense wealth. He was turning his trading company into a military and political power. This lesson was not lost on the English East India Company, and they had a young man in their service who would prove to be even more ruthless and effective at this new game than Duplex. His name was Robert Clive. Clive was an unlikely hero. He had been sent to India as a junior accountant, a writer, because he was too unruly and violent for a respectable career back in England. He was a moody, difficult young man who hated India and suffered from severe depression. He even attempted suicide. He had no military training. But he possessed a breathtaking audacity, a street fighter's instinct, and a reckless bravery. When the Anglo-French rivalry in Europe spilled over into India, Clive found his true calling in what he called the military sphere. In a series of conflicts known as the Carnatic Wars, Clive, leading the company's own newly raised sepoy forces, outmaneuvered and defeated Duplex's French armies. The student had surpassed the master. Clive returned to England a wealthy hero, but a failed attempt at a political career left him broke and humiliated. He needed to return to India to make a second fortune. And the company, now facing a new global war with France, the 7 Years' War, desperately needed its most brilliant, if unconventional, general. The stage for the next great act of our drama was Bengal. Bengal was the richest province of the Mughal Empire. Its fertile lands produced vast surpluses of rice, and its million weavers created the world's most desired silks and muslins. It was, quite simply, the jewel in the Mughal crown. It was ruled by a wise and capable old Nawab, Aliverdi Khan, who had maintained a rare island of peace and prosperity. Aliverdi understood the Europeans. He once told his generals that they were like a hive of bees, of whose honey you might reap benefit, but if you disturbed their hive they would sting you to death. But Aliverdi was old, and his chosen heir was his grandson, Siraj-ud-Dawla. By all contemporary accounts, Indian, French, and English, Siraj was a disaster. He was a cruel, ignorant, and psychopathic young man, known for his debauchery and violence. One historian, his own cousin, depicts him as a serial rapist who took pleasure in drowning boatloads of innocent people. He had alienated almost everyone at court, including the most powerful figures in Bengal, the great bankers known as the Jagat Seths, a family so wealthy they were known as the bankers of the world. When the old Nawab Aliverdi Khan finally died in April 1756, Siraj-ud-Dawla ascended the throne. He immediately became suspicious of the English in Calcutta, who, fearing the outbreak of war with France, had begun strengthening their fortifications without his permission. Siraj saw this as a direct challenge to his authority. "What honor is left to us," he asked, "when a few traitors, who have not yet learned to wash their bottoms, defy a ruler's order?" In a lightning-fast campaign, he marched on Calcutta. The company's defenses were pathetic, its leadership incompetent. The governor, Roger Drake, fled on a ship, abandoning his men. The city fell in a matter of days. The capture of Calcutta was a humiliation, but it was what happened next that would echo through British history. The captured English garrison was herded into a tiny punishment cell, a cramped guard room just 18 feet long. With little air and no water, in the suffocating heat of a Bengali June, most of them died overnight. The incident became infamous as the Black Hole of Calcutta. For the company, the loss of Calcutta was a devastating economic blow. Its most profitable trading post was gone. But for Robert Clive, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. He was sent from Madras at the head of a relief force. In a series of swift and brilliant maneuvers, Clive retook Calcutta and forced a terrified Siraj-ud-Dawla to sign a treaty restoring all the company's privileges. And there, the story might have ended. But a new player had entered the game. The Jagat Seths, the great bankers of Bengal, along with a group of disaffected generals led by a veteran commander named Mir Jafar, had decided they could no longer tolerate Siraj's rule. They had seen Clive's military prowess and decided to reach out to the company. They proposed a conspiracy, If the company would use its army to help them overthrow Siraj, they would replace him with the more pliable Mir Jafar. In return, they offered the company an astronomical sum of money, the equivalent of the entire annual revenue of Bengal. This was something entirely new in Indian history. A group of Indian financiers plotting with an international corporation to use its private army to stage a coup. Clive, ever the opportunist, agreed. The climax came in June 1757, in a mango grove near a village called Plassey. Clive's small army of 800 Europeans and 2,200 sepoys faced Siraj-ud-Daulla's massive force of 50,000. On paper, it was an impossible fight. But the Battle of Plassey was not really a battle. It was a transaction. As the two armies faced each other, a sudden monsoon downpour soaked the Nawab's gunpowder, rendering his cannons useless. But the real betrayal came from within. Mir Jafar, who commanded a huge portion of Siraj's army, stood by and did nothing, just as he had promised Clive he would. Another of Siraj's key commanders had also been bribed. The battle was over before it had truly begun. Siraj's army disintegrated, and he fled the field on a camel. He was captured a few days later and brutally murdered on the orders of Mir Jafar's son. Clive marched into the Bengali capital, Murshidabad, as a conqueror. He installed Mir Jafar on the throne and then proceeded to the treasury. The entire contents were loaded onto 100 boats and floated down the river to the company's headquarters in Calcutta. The prize money was staggering. A good portion went directly into Clive's pocket, making him the richest self-made man in Europe. The rest went to the company and its officers. But Plassey was about more than just money. It was the moment the company transformed. It was no longer just a trading corporation. It was now a kingmaker, the dominant military power in India's richest province. Yet even this was not the final act. The greatest prize was yet to come. After the chaos that followed Plassey, and another, even more decisive victory at the Battle of Buxar in 1765, the company's forces found themselves masters of not just Bengal, but of all of northeastern India. They had also, by chance, captured the Mughal emperor himself, the now wandering and powerless Shah Alam. It was in August 1765, in his tent at Allahabad, that Clive performed his final, most audacious masterstroke. He sat the Emperor Shah Alam on his own dining room table, draped with a chintz bedspread, and forced him to sign a document. This document was the Diwani. It granted the East India Company the legal right to collect the taxes for the three provinces of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, a territory of 20 million people. In return, the emperor would receive a handsome pension. With a single stroke of a pen, a private corporation had become a sovereign power. The transition was complete. A company of merchants, based in a small London office, now held the financial and administrative control of a vast Indian territory, all protected by its own private army. For the people of Bengal, the consequences were catastrophic. The company's rule quickly turned into what the British themselves described as the shaking of the pagoda tree. It was a period of unregulated plunder and asset stripping. With no stake in the long-term well-being of the country, company officials were concerned only with extracting as much wealth as possible, as quickly as possible. Bengal's wealth, which for centuries had drawn traders from all over the world, was now systematically drained and shipped to Britain. Indian weavers and artisans were forced to work for the company at starvation wages. The final, horrific result of this corporate greed came in 1770. A terrible famine, made infinitely worse by the company's policies, swept through Bengal. While company merchants hoarded grain and speculated on rising prices, the company itself not only failed to provide relief but actually increased tax collection. Platoons of sepoys were sent into the countryside to enforce payment, erecting gibbets to hang those who resisted. Perhaps 1 in 5 Bengalis, as many as 1.2 million people, starved to death. It was one of the greatest failures of corporate responsibility in history. Back in London, as news of the famine and the rampant corruption trickled home, public opinion began to turn against the company. Horace Walpole wrote, "We have outdone the Spaniards in Peru. The groans of India have mounted to heaven." The company's share price collapsed. It was on the verge of bankruptcy. In a scene that seems eerily familiar today, this massive corporation, deemed too big to fail, had to go to the British government and ask for a colossal bailout. Parliament agreed to the loan, but there was a price. The government passed the Regulating Act of 1773, the first step in bringing the rogue corporation under state control. The company's Indian possessions would now be overseen by a Governor-General, appointed by Parliament. The first man to hold this post was Warren Hastings. Hastings was a very different man from Clive. He was a scholar, a linguist, and a genuine admirer of Indian culture. He had lived in India since he was a teenager and spoke fluent Bengali, Urdu, and Persian. He was appalled by the corruption he saw around him and worked tirelessly to reform the company's administration and make its rule more just. But he was constantly undermined by his rivals on the new council, particularly a venomous and ambitious politician named Philip Francis, who was determined to bring him down. After years of bitter feuding, which even resulted in a duel where Hastings shot Francis, Francis returned to London. There, he allied himself with the great orator Edmund Burke and began a campaign to have Hastings impeached for corruption and tyranny. The impeachment of Warren Hastings, which began in 1788, became the great political spectacle of the age. For 7 years, Burke and his fellow prosecutors accused Hastings of being the Captain General of iniquity, responsible for the rape and plunder of India. In the end, Hastings was acquitted of all charges, but the trial served as a powerful symbol. Parliament had put the company's empire on trial, and it marked the beginning of the end for the company's untamed power. But the story of the company's conquest was not yet over. 2 major Indian powers still stood in its way. In the south, there was the formidable Sultanate of Mysore, ruled first by the brilliant General Hyder Ali, and then by his even more famous son, Tipu Sultan. Tipu was a relentless and innovative warrior, a modernizer who imported French technology and embraced European military tactics to use against the British. He was the company's most feared enemy, known as the Tiger of Mysore. And across western and central India, there was the still mighty Maratha Confederacy. Though weakened by internal divisions, their armies were vast and their cavalry legendary. In 1780, these 2 powers, along with the Nizam of Hyderabad, formed a triple alliance with the aim of expelling the British from India. That same year, at the Battle of Palalur, Tipu and his father inflicted a devastating defeat on a company army, the most severe blow the British had ever suffered in India. For a moment, it seemed as if the company's Indian adventure might be over. The British Empire was teetering everywhere. It was the same period they were losing their American colonies to George Washington. But the company survived. It was saved by Warren Hastings' deft diplomacy, which broke the Indian alliance, and by the sheer depth of its financial resources. The company could always raise more money and field more troops than any of its Indian rivals. The final act of conquest began with the arrival of a new Governor-General in 1798, Richard Wellesley. Wellesley was an unabashed imperialist. He despised the mercantile spirit of the company and saw it simply as an instrument for the expansion of the British Empire. His goal was not trade, but total dominion. His first target was Tipu Sultan. In 1799, Wellesley unleashed a massive, overwhelming force against Mysore. The capital, Srirangapatnam, was stormed. Tipu Sultan, refusing to surrender, died fighting in the breach, sword in hand. His kingdom was dismembered, his treasury looted. With Tipu gone, only the Marathas remained, and they, tragically, proceeded to destroy themselves. A bitter civil war broke out between the young, inexperienced leaders of the Maratha houses of Shindai and Holkar. Wellesley brilliantly exploited these divisions. He followed the old Roman maxim, divide et impera, divide and rule. He backed one faction against the other, and when they had exhausted themselves, he turned on them both. The decisive campaign came in 1803. 2 company armies, one in the south led by Wellesley's younger brother, Arthur, the future Duke of Wellington, and one in the north led by the 60-year-old veteran Lord Lake, advanced into Maratha territory. At the Battle of Assaye, Arthur Wellesley fought and won one of the hardest battles of his entire career, later saying it was tougher than Waterloo, but the main prize lay in the north. Lord Lake's objective was the ancient Mughal capital, Delhi. There, the now 75-year-old, blind Emperor Shah Alam still sat on a replica of the peacock throne, a powerless pawn in the hands of the Marathas. He had outlived all his enemies, Clive, Ghulam Qadir, Imad al-Mulk, but he was a prisoner in his own palace, the ruler of a largely illusory empire. On September 11, 1803, at the Battle of Delhi, Lake's army defeated the last major Maratha force in northern India. 5 days later, Lord Lake rode into the Red Fort. He was ushered into the presence of the emperor. The British general found the descendant of the great Mughals, an object of pity, blinded and aged, stripped of authority, and reduced to poverty, seated under a small tattered canopy, the fragment of regal state, and the mockery of human pride. Lake bowed before the sightless monarch and announced that he had come to offer him the protection of the British. The conquest was complete. A commercial corporation had come to replace the Mughals as the masters of India. In less than half a century, the East India Company had gone from being a supplicant trader to the de facto ruler of a subcontinent. The anarchy was over, but a new, corporate empire had been born. Commentary. So, what are we to make of this incredible, and often horrifying, story? William Dalrymple's The Anarchy is more than just a history book. It is a profound meditation on power, greed, and the birth of the modern world. It forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth, that the British Empire in India was born not from a grand national project, but from the actions of a private corporation, driven by the relentless pursuit of profit. One of the most powerful lessons of the book is how easily a state can be subverted by corporate power. The East India Company didn't just trade. It lobbied, it bribed, and it used its immense wealth to influence Parliament back in London. Returned nabobs like Clive bought seats in the House of Commons, ensuring that the government's policies always favored the company's interests. The state and the corporation became locked in an intimate, and often toxic, dance. The company used state power, the Royal Navy and Army, to protect its commercial interests, while the state came to rely on the wealth generated by the company's Indian conquests. This story feels chillingly relevant today. We live in an age where multinational corporations wield enormous power, sometimes rivaling that of nation-states. They can influence elections, shape legislation, and, as we saw in the 2008 financial crisis, their failures can bring entire economies to their knees. The story of the East India Company is history's most stark warning about what can happen when corporate power is unchecked and unaccountable. It is the original story of a company that became too big to fail. But the book also offers a more personal, human lesson. It shows us how ordinary people, driven by ambition and opportunity, can be capable of both extraordinary bravery and terrible cruelty. Figures like Robert Clive are not simple villains. He was a man of immense talent and courage, but also of profound flaws, a corporate predator who acted with a complete lack of moral scruple when it came to enriching himself and his company. The story of Shah Alam, the blind emperor, is equally powerful. His life was a tragedy of almost Shakespearean proportions. He was born into immense privilege but lived to see his empire crumble, his family brutalized, and his own eyes gouged out. Yet, through it all, he never lost his dignity or his belief in his own divinely appointed role. He is a symbol of an old world, a world of honor, poetry, and courtly grace, being swept away by a new, more ruthless age of corporate calculation. So, what can we take away from this? The first step, I think, is simply awareness. To understand the world we live in, we have to understand how it was made. We need to be aware of the complex relationship between governments and corporations, and to question who truly holds power in our societies. The second is a sense of humility. The story of the company's conquest of India was not inevitable. It was a product of chance, of individual decisions, and of the fatal divisions within Indian society itself. The Mughal Empire did not fall just because the company was strong. It fell because it was already rotting from within. It's a reminder that no power, no matter how great, is permanent. That was a summary of The Anarchy by William Dalrymple. We've touched upon the grand sweep of this epic story today. But I have to be honest with you. A summary can only ever be a map. It can't replace the experience of walking the terrain yourself. The real power of this book lies in the details, the vivid descriptions, the personal letters, the voices of the people who lived through this chaotic time. This summary is here to help you decide if this journey is one you want to take. If any part of this story has sparked your curiosity or stirred your sense of justice, then I urge you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning history. It's about understanding the very DNA of the modern world, and the timeless struggle between power and morality. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book on Billionaire's Bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.